Welcome to our channel Scary Sagas, where we bring you the most amazing true horror stories. Today, we have bone-chilling stories that will make your blood run cold. These stories are based on real events and have been passed down among the people. Are you ready to hear the ghastly ghosts and demonic spirits that still roam the deserted halls and corridors? My grandfather was a World War II combat casualty who passed away decades before our family immigrated to the United States. He and my mother have a strong relationship, and she visited Italy for his memorial once every 5 years. His memory would be honored by the family with a sizable gathering that lasted all weekend. I initially traveled with her when I was 19 since our family was a blue-collar one and could not afford many flights. What happened when we arrived still astounds me to this day, considering that I had never given any thought to ghost stories. It all began the first evening we were in Italy, which feels like a lifetime ago. When Mom and I arrived at my aunt's house, we quickly went to dinner. I retired to bed while my mother and aunt talked. I tossed and turned for several hours before I finally got up and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. It's difficult for me to describe, but for some reason, I felt that I simply had to take a stroll without informing Mom. I changed, then crept out the rear toward the street while remaining in the darkness. I couldn't explain why my heart was beating so quickly. I questioned whether I was dreaming because the streets were deserted and unbearably quiet. I followed a road that felt pulled to me, and before long I was in the mist-covered plaza. The mist gave me the impression that I was not alone. For some reason, I started to approach the enormous fountain in the middle of the square as I was moving through it like a curious youngster. I saw a shadow emerge from behind it while I was around 10 feet away. As I stared at the figure, who appeared to be sipping from the fountain, my blood suddenly froze, causing me to stop in my tracks. I took a few more steps in the direction of the fountain because, bizarre as it may seem, I felt like I knew the dark figure. The apparition immediately disappeared before my eyes, and I gasped. I circled the fountain while calling out in Italian to see if anyone was there. I felt safe and cozy as a warm warmth swept over me. Despite the fact that the view was clearly terrifying due to the gray mist reflecting off the lamps, I nevertheless felt safe. The hairs on the back of my neck sprang up as I started to leave. When I glanced around, the shadow was once again drinking from the fountain. I stepped back and yelled again, feeling secure, but it disappeared a second time. As soon as I realized I was a witness to the paranormal, I feigned to leave, thinking the eerie ghost was teasing me or perhaps just being bashful. I swiftly whirled around and hurried back, shocked to see that the figure was a soldier. He grinned as a nice blanket of warmth engulfed me before he disappeared once more. I went back to my aunt's house reluctantly since I just knew that he wouldn't show up again until after I was gone permanently. Mom and Mayan were washing their wine glasses at the sink when I entered the house through the back door. Mom was taken aback and reprimanded me for leaving the house without letting them know. My mouth began to smile. When they questioned me about why I was grinning, I explained my experience at the fountain, how thrilled I was to have seen a ghost, and that it wasn't quite as terrifying as I had anticipated. Mom and my aunt both began to inquire about his appearance, and my aunt afterward went to get a photo book. She displayed a vintage image of a man enjoying a fountain drink in the open air. The fact that it was the same man as before astounded me. My granddad was there. We were all in awe that his ghost was still rumored to haunt his favorite place. It also clarified the welcoming impression he gave me. I won't forget that encounter for the rest of my life. Far from being terrified, Even though I'm older now, I still remember what occurred, and ever since then, I've been listening to other people tell similar tales. I like to hear true ghost stories, therefore I'll share mine with you right now. Even if there are mitigating conditions, it's difficult to dismiss a ghost when it's in your face. To be honest, I have a good grain of skepticism. I had a turbo case of the flu when I was a tiny slip of a girl that left me feeling as though I had been run over by a train. My mother put me to sleep and gave me iced tea and bowls of chicken soup while she cared for me. I slept a lot, and when I did wake up, I read my books and comforted myself by cuddling my teddy bear. I was mostly miserable at the time. My mother phoned the doctor after a few days, and he soon showed up there with his toolbox. Even though having to take unpleasant medicine looked like torture, it was nothing compared to what terrified me. When I mentioned this experience to others, they've always attributed it to a fever, but it seemed more genuine than that. When I began to have a severe fever, I made an effort to keep it to myself since, in general, I'm not a flibbertigibbet and don't want others to fuss over me. I don't know why, but when I began to perspire heavily in the middle of the night, I felt ashamed. I was concerned that Mother would believe I had wet the bed, but I was diverted when I heard something. Out of nowhere, a guttural sound like labored breathing could be heard. I was so clogged that I initially believed the sound was coming from my own throat. I always have to test things since I'm a little bit like a scientist, so I held my breath to check whether the sounds were anything else. When I heard the rattling breath again, my perspiration turned to ice, and my hair stood on end. I squealed but did not immediately call my parents. Then I saw that my breath was escaping like cigarette smoke. At first, I found it amusing and continued to exhale forcefully on purpose. But then I heard a vile giggle, which forced me to sit up in bed right away. As the laughing voice went on, I felt the coolness in the air and began to tremble. As I tried to switch on the lamp, I could hardly control my trembling. My fingers searched for the switch with difficulty, but as the laughing stopped, I froze. I was feeling woozy, but I knew there was something else in the room. I shivered in terror when I realized that the streetlights outside were illuminating the black fog that was developing at the foot of my bed. The light turned on when I was finally able to flick the switch, but the fog at the end of my bed kept becoming thicker. I hurriedly pulled the covers up and over my head, but I could still see. Boy, I sure wished I couldn't see. I was frightened when I noticed the dark fog moving toward me under the covers like storm clouds. I instantly sprang out of bed since I'm a bit of a chicken, believing I was at the door, and went over to the wall. While fumbling for the handle, I heard a horrifying giggle coming from behind me. I noticed a scary apparition approaching when I turned to look behind me. At the moment, all I knew was that I was terrified by the devil. But now as I reflect back on it, it reminds me of a bully I used to fight with frequently at school. When it reached me, I shouted and started scratching at the walls until my parents came running. I was hauled away from the wall when they grabbed me. They immediately brought me to the hospital since I was in delirium. My fever quickly subsided, and I was calmed down enough to return home. I have never again seen something like that. Even when you're sick, you can still distinguish what's genuine and what isn't, can't you? I remember everyone telling me it was just a fever, but can't you sense the difference between what's real and what isn't? I've persuaded myself through the years that what occurred that day was unimportant, but I know in my heart that if I ever get terminally ill again, I'll probably recognize a familiar face as I pass away. They seem to like that these stories will leave you with more questions than answers. They are a reminder that sometimes the truth is much darker and more mysterious than we ever imagined. Join us next time on Scary Sagas for other spine-chilling true stories.